The Bookshelf with me, Ryan Tubridy, is brought to you by Ballymore. Founded by Sean Mulryan in 1982, Ballymore has long put arts and culture at the heart of what it does, from supporting artists and performers to weaving creativity into the neighbourhoods it builds. Alongside this cultural commitment, Ballymore creates places with soul. Its international portfolio is filled with award-winning workspaces, homes, shopping centres and entire neighbourhoods across Dublin, London, Bratislava, Prague and Berlin. Places where design, innovation and creativity come together and where people can live, work and play. Well, welcome. And today on The Bookshelf, we have a truly remarkable guest. She's wonderful. Alice Leahy is a pioneering advocate for the homeless and the marginalised in Ireland. And through her decades of work with the Alice Leahy Trust, she has shone like a light. It marks its 50th anniversary extraordinarily this November. And she has given dignity. She's given a voice, she's given warmth and kindness to those who are too often ignored in society. Today she joins us, not really to talk about policy or practice, but of course, obviously, the books that changed and shaped her life. Alice Leahy, what a pleasure to see you.
Well, Ryan, it's like old times.
Isn't it just?
It's just wonderful to be here with you. And if you don't mind me saying,
Please.
I met people out this morning and told them where I was coming.
Yeah.
And people miss you. So it's great now to be here.
It's nice. And I get the lovely thing about this programme is I come home quite a lot to meet people like you and to chat. And I remember when we first met, you see, I would have known about you before I got working on radio and TV. And I always thought you, and forgive me for saying this, but I'm going to be honest with you. I always thought you were quite formidable. And I use that word as a euphemism for scary because I just thought you and I probably wouldn't get on. I don't know why. I got that into my head. Yeah. And then you were coming on the show one day, and the moment you sat down in front of me, I said, oh, this is a really intriguing. You weren't formidable in that sense. You were intriguing and you were warm and you were engaging. And most of all, I think that this is the word I would use, you were passionate. And I love that in people like yourself. So I think we kind of got on from the get-go, didn't we?
Did.
I don't know how that was.
But see, I think that's life. There are some people I meet for the first time and I feel like giving them a hug. I like them. Yeah. But then there are others and I just feel my body tells me no.
Isn't that funny?
But I think that's what makes us human beings special. And I think we should be aware of it too. Yeah.
I'm intrigued to get back to the beginning in your life. Tell us what part of Ireland you were born in. And were you born into a happy home or were you born in a difficult home? How would you describe it?
I had a wonderful childhood.
Did you?
And I think the older you get, the more you realise, and I said this to my brothers and sisters recently, how lucky we were. The parents we had, but also the environment we grew up in.
Who were they, your parents?
Jack and Hanny. And they married in their 20s. My father, we lived on a very big estate owned by Major Jack Hughes and his wife, Olivia, who was a Cruikshank. And we lived in a tiny house on that estate. And my grandfather before lived on a tiny house down facing their house in the middle of the fields. Now that is a ruin now, but recently I visited and I noticed there are gooseberries grown there.
Yes.
But anyway,
and what part of the country are we in here?
We're in Feathert, into Prairie. Okay. And I used to spend hours looking out. We had a tiny house. We had no running water when I was growing up. The electricity came after I grew up. I look a bit younger than I am.
You look considerably lower. I'm glad you said it.
You couldn't say it. It wouldn't be politically correct. You'd be in trouble. But we used to go to the well for water. Yes. We used to have a barrel collecting the rainwater to wash our hair.
Wow.
We had all our vegetables. We had fruit. And we didn't have our own cows when I was growing up, but later we had, when I was a few years old, we had our own cow, Bluebell. But we lived on this estate and I felt every acre of that land was mine. I never felt it wasn't. You valued everything in it. And we were valued there. My father was the steward there. My mother would love to have gone to secondary school, but they couldn't afford it at the time. And she was a very bright woman, and so was my father. And I think if they had the educational opportunities that people have now, but I think maybe education might have destroyed them.
Well, here's the question. I was one of the other guests in this season is Colm Tabine.
Oh, Colm.
You know Colm.
I met too and say hello to him.
He's great fun.
He's wonderful.
But he was saying that his mother had to leave school early.
Yeah.
And she was a voracious reader.
Yeah.
And I was suggesting to him that a lot of women and men, but let's say women of that generation we're talking about, your mother, his mother, we may have, as a country, lost, and as a society generally, lost a lot of great contributors in science and law. And if we had let these people continue their education.
I think so. And I think even by you giving people an opportunity to express that, I think it will get maybe younger, because younger people are searching for something. And I think I was reading a letter yesterday, or an article on the Irish Times. I grew up around newspapers and books. I'll fill you in on that in a minute.
Do.
But it was 3 lecturers talking about how artificial intelligence in the university is destroying questioning things.
Interesting.
And I feel with the women of Colm Tóibín's mother's age and my mother's age, they were wonderful. And it was all about, my mother used to write letters to the Farmer's Journal. Now, the Farmer's Journal cost 2p when it came out, and I think it was in the early 19-something. And she used to write letters to the paper. I find I'm writing letters to the paper now. Yeah. But they were so, and everyone was into protecting the environment as well.
And she was writing these smart, thoughtful, caring letters. And could you imagine if she'd gone on to university and what the possibilities were for her? So obviously you had 2 curious parents. You had 2 lovely parents. You mentioned siblings. You had...
I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay, 5 of you.
And we're all into, and their children now, it's great. Their children now are going to university, and that is just wonderful. But when we were growing up, we were surrounded by books.
There you go. And what sort of books?
We had everything. I was just thinking, and thanks, it's great to have the opportunity to even reflect on everything. I was looking at, we had Little Women, we had Treasure Island.
Oh, lovely.
We had wonderful nature books. And we always had, now, of course, the paper you got said what politics you are.
So just for people who don't know this, the Irish Independent would say one thing and the Irish Press would say another.
But it was Curly Wee and Gussie Goose and that.
And they were in what paper, Alice?
And they were in the Indo.
In the Indo. So now so Fine Gael family.
It's okay, we move on from that. And then we would have the National Geographic magazine.
Oh, lovely.
We would have the Messenger, that's the religious one, is it? The religious one. We would have Ireland's Own, which is over 100 years old. And we would have wonderful books on nature. And I remember one wonderful book on elephants. And I can still see this tattered old book with this tattered elderly elephant. And Pat Kenny was on your podcast, and Pat would have been talking about
his father was an elephant keeper.
His father was an elephant keeper.
Yeah, in Dublin Zoo.
And then we were painting, we had jigsaws, we had puzzles, we had storytelling, we had all these wonderful things.
Nurturing, intellectually nurturing for kids. Yeah. But also exciting. Exactly. It wasn't like, here's the blackboard. Oh, no. It was kind of make and do.
But we were all, there was a huge work ethic in our family.
Yeah.
From day one.
So what were the kids doing?
From the kids, we start off, we all had little jobs to do in the house. You went out to collect the eggs, maybe. You went out to see that the dog was okay. You went out to see the flowers, that they were okay. From the word go, and I think it has affected me, because I am still working and I love work.
Was school a happy place? Did you have nice teachers?
Actually, I have no bad memories from. I've been very lucky. But I went to the national school and we had a Kerry teacher. Now, Kerry is lovely. And there is something about, I think, the wisdom of Kerry people. There is. But she had a policy, and the more I think about it, she used to get us to sit quietly for 10 to 15 minutes. And it wasn't kind of slap your hand and be quiet. It was very much, looking back on it, I think it was to get us to listen to our inner self.
Meditation.
And I started doing meditation in the 70s. I started doing TM, and then I did yoga.
Transcendental meditation.
I did all of those. Yeah. And I would meditate every morning and in the evening.
Still.
And I think a quiet space, and even at work when we have our staff meeting, and of course they all said, Alice, you're mad. I'd say, no, sit still for a few minutes and just calm down after the morning and just listen to your own heartbeat. You'll spend the morning listening to others. But I think it's very important. And it's as if it's new. We hear about mindfulness, we hear about, this was our teacher telling us to do that.
Wow, it's amazing. Let's go to your first book today, shall we, Alice Leahy? You've gone for your first, the book from your childhood is this lovely story by Anna Sewell. People will remember the music from the television show, or they might have read the book initially. So tell us about this book.
But the book was, and they republished it. They republished it recently, because I remember the one I had was a hardback one.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure.
And it was kind of tattered. But didn't I come across this in my local shop
Black
recently?
Beauty, that's what we're talking about.
And I read it all again.
Did you?
And do you know, when you read it again, you realise the wisdom of that woman. But Black Beauty is an amazing book. And this was the only novel that Anna Sewell wrote.
Is it?
And I think she was a Quaker. And the Quakers, of course, are hugely an amazing group of people. But they describe the horses. It describes Ginger. And Ginger was a horse that was never cared for. And when you read about how Black Beauty described these horses, Ginger would be like so many people, sadly, we meet in our work, who were never cared for.
This is in your line, in the homeless.
In the line of homelessness.
Yeah.
And even with people growing up. And then there was Peggy Shortlegs. And Peggy fighting her corner, trying to get out there. And then there was Mary Legs. And Mary Legs was an old pony. Mary Legs, people could call me now. Never mind that.
Mary Legs.
And then they went on to talk about the war horses.
Yeah.
And then religion came into it too, because the people working didn't want to work on a Sunday. And then they said the importance of a day of rest for the horse and for you. And then there were the London cab horses. And the only time I never see a beautiful black horse except at a funeral.
Yes.
And they're sitting there and they're
with the
great, and the ears. And even Black Beauty describes, describes how each of those horses have to behave themselves and how they get that job.
So the author, Anna Sewell, was kind of applying human traits to horses, really. I mean, it's a metaphor.
And used the voice of Black Beauty so long ago. I mean, it was published first I have the date there, it was 1877.
Oh, I thought it was a 20th century book, isn't it?
I think that book should be in the schools now, or even for parents doing a parenting course, because there are a lot of parents who are struggling and they're hearing a lot of scientific data.
Yes.
When in fact, if you pick up Black Beauty, I suggest you get it, Ryan, and
I think I might, yeah.
Because every horse tells a story. It is fascinating.
So it's kind of, I didn't realise this about that story. Well,
I didn't realise it either.
It's kind of Dickensian, equine Dickensian.
Yeah, it is.
Story.
But there's a message in it for everyone today.
Wow.
Because every chapter tells you about a different horse, Black Beauty, met.
Okay, yeah.
And they shared a conversation. It's wonderful.
Let me have a look at this. And it's not a massive, it's ostensibly a children's read, but like Animal Farm or something. They're nothing.
But it's nicer than Animal Farm.
Animal Farm's quite cruel,
it's softer than Animal
absolutely,
Farm. Yeah. And you could relate to it.
Now tell me about yourself, and as you're describing the horses that seem a little bit downtrodden, if you will, I can see the kind of beginnings in your life of a social consciousness. And this is what has defined you in many respects. What age were you when you thought life isn't fair for other people?
I came across a piece of paper some time ago. I found it in a book, and I had written somewhere that I'm going to spend my life helping the poor.
Did you?
I did.
What age were you, would you say?
And I would have been very young at that age. And it was just a snippet of paper, because I've got rid of a lot of that stuff, but I was going through stuff and I found it. But anyway, I decided I would go nursing. Now, I would like to be a vet, but money didn't allow for that. But I always believe you are where you're meant to be.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
And so I worked as a chambermaid in the Ormond Hotel in Clonmel, and I think I met Jimmy O'Dea there. Oh. And part of that was to save money for my fee to go nursing, because you had to pay a fee to go nursing, or you could go to England and train. But I wanted to stay in Ireland, and nursing I was drawn to nursing because my mother too used to look after Olivia Hughes's mother when she was alive. So she was kind of a nursing attendant, but of course all her work was in the family home. And so I decided to go nursing in Bagot Street. But there I used to visit the county home in Cashel when I was growing up, and we used to visit, there were two older men who had geese down the fields. And they were Protestants and we were Catholic. And I also think that combination of that when I was growing up was hugely influential. We visited everyone. They were all part of our lives. And even when I went to Dublin, you would write to people like that. It might be the only Christmas card they get. And you kept in touch with home through the newspaper because we didn't have phones when I started nursing. But when I worked in Baggot Street, it was very clear that a lot of the domestic staff came from the institutions.
Now, tell us about the institutions, just as a little reminder.
And I suppose none of us and I think there were people who worked in those institutions who really, they were there, and I think the institutions were running this for the state, and there were troubled people running it, and there were troubled people living there.
And you're talking about the Magdalen Laundries, the Borstals, all these places where people who were uncomfortable, not uncomfortable, people who were just weren't fitting into society's expectations were kind of, and some people said there was a dumping ground, some people said it was cruel, some people said it had a purpose.
And I think we could have a lengthy discussion around all of that. But the women I met who had been, they worked in the hospital and they took so much pride in what they were doing, and they were very well cared for. When I say they were very well cared for, I mean, I recently met two doctors. I hadn't seen them for about 50 years, and we were just talking about them, and they were talking about Nellie, who worked in the doctor's mess, and she was like a mother to them all, and yet they cared for her. So there was a wonderful sense of everyone kind of being in there together.
And you wrote this note when you were very young to say, I'd like to care for people.
Yeah.
So you got into nursing, which is a very caring profession. Yeah. It goes back to what we were saying earlier on about your mother not getting into education. Yeah. If you had got into veterinary, we would not be sitting here today talking about all the homeless people you've given strength and care for. So strangely, fate has decided you weren't going to have the money to do that. Yeah. And here we are in probably a much more beautiful, meaningful life than you might have had as a vet.
And also, look at me here now today. I know this is just a tiny place where you are here, and look at what you have brought to our nation and our world. And here am I on the national airways. You know, I'm sitting here with you as if we're having a
cup of coffee, which we literally are.
Cup of coffee and having a chat. Yeah. And I think this is so hugely important. But also, when I came to Dublin, I was training. When you're training as a nurse in those days, and probably still, you didn't have the time off for relationships, because you couldn't make a date with somebody because you couldn't be sure you'd turn up. Yeah. But I did a number of things. I went to the Grafton Academy, and I remember making a beautiful kingfisher dress. Yeah. I went to a German course. I remember going to sociology.
Always bettering yourself.
I was always. And I still have the interest in art. And they were little things. I remember going to German classes, and I ended up going to Germany afterwards. But I saw, I think it was on the Evening Press, because I used to read the papers all the time. And there was a notice that the Legion of Mary were having a meeting of something. And I went to it because, now I'm not a member of the Legion of Mary, but I do admire the people who were, and I think Frank Duff was a man before his time in many ways. I reread his story again recently. But Father Donald O'Mahony was working in Benburb Street. And of course, I'd been in the rotunda at this stage, and I remember meeting all the women, and I can still see the charts on the end of the bed. I loved the prenatal ward, but the same women coming back year after year, and another baby, or they may have lost a baby in between.
Should we mention Benburb Street? Are you referring to that it's a red light district?
Yes, but I went down with Donald O'Mahony. Yeah. He was visiting people there, so I went down to the flats there. Okay. And I got to know some of the mothers I knew from the rotunda. Yeah. And they might have just one cup of tea, and they'd give it to you when you go in. And I still think the state should have developed those flats like they did in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Yeah. And renovate them, because they were solid buildings, but the poverty there. And then a group of us got together and we set up a mothers group in a little place across the way. And remember, we got a second-hand washing machine for the mothers. Yeah. You couldn't do that now, health and safety. And then we used to and they were wonderful people. And then I got to know VSI, you see, Voluntary Services International. And I think I saw where Claire was with Voluntary Services overseas. Right. And that would be, we had VSI. Yeah, you're talking about all the same. You're a lovely partner, and I'm delighted I met her, and I wish you the very happy days. Thank you, Alice. And we used to go down and do up people's nice flats and take people on outings out the mountains. All of that, now, which was a hugely energising time. And at the same time, I was working as a nurse. But I was very conscious of how you can use nursing to great effect and use what you've been trained to do, when you're working with people like that.
You were personally, emotionally, intellectually enjoying the, if I may, satisfaction of seeing somebody gaining from what can happen when society comes together just to be decent and kind and to help somebody in a non-patronising way.
And you know what that reminded me? Recently I was reading, that wonderful book by Frankl, The Meaning of Life.
Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist in a concentration camp.
And I visited Dachau at one stage.
Yes, yeah.
But he said, your life is meaningful if you're helping other people to see that their life has a meaning.
Yeah.
And the more I think of these wonderful words of wisdom, it was when you were with these mothers. And afterwards, in the area of homelessness, I know I met a man who is still out there. I met him not too long ago. The poor man, yet I hardly recognise him now. And I have no doubt I listened to his heartbeat in his mother's womb. I have no doubt, because I could see the chart and I could see the name. But anyway, I got to know people. I got to know about poverty. I got to know about how lucky I was, because life in the city was very different. And there was grinding poverty. But there was a wonderful sense of, people had a great sense of, in a way, caring for each other. It might be very basic, if you wanted a spoon of sugar or if you wanted something. And I can still see myself sitting on the floor there, surrounded by people. And they only had one toilet on the landing to go to. But yet, did that bog me down? No. I'm sure I did feel angry. I'm sure I did. But anyway, after a while, I gave up midwifery. Because when I'd be walking down O'Connell Street, every woman I'd see, oh God, that's a breech birth. She's heading for Earth there. She's having twins. So I said, time to give it up.
Okay, yeah, that's so fun.
So I went back to Beckett Street and I was night sister. And night sister was another world. It was wonderful. Am I going on too long, Ryan?
No, we're getting the insight. I'd like to ask you about another book.
You would, but maybe we should.
No, but but hold the thought, because we can come and go as we're doing beautifully. And I'm just thoroughly enjoying what you're saying, and I'm learning. But please tell me about the book that changed your life, Alice, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I couldn't really.
It's a hard question, isn't it?
Think it is. I couldn't think of any book that changed my life, but I suppose a number of books certainly had an influence on me.
That'll do nicely. One or two of those would be great.
But I think there was one book that certainly reaffirmed my belief in what I do, and it was by Doris Lessing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Doris Lessing, of course, was a wonderful woman. She was born in Persia. She left her children in Rhodesia. She went to London. But she wrote two books under a different name, Jane Summers, and there were two diaries. And one was... she died just about 10 years ago. But the Diaries of Jane Summers.
And are these
it is amazing.
Fiction or non-fiction?
Fiction.
Fiction, so she made them up.
But it's a bit like Black Beauty.
Oh,
it's almost the same.
Okay.
But the two novels were linked, and it was a huge portrayal of women's psyche, but it's not, she wouldn't have been into, we'd say, feminist issues as we so hear about, or in her face every time. Yes. But she wrote two diaries, and the first one, I'll read it here, because the first one was the diary of a good neighbour. And she was concerned about the comfort and her life when everything was turned upside down, when she met an elderly woman who was lonely and poverty-stricken. And she goes on to describe how she, as a younger woman, met that woman and how suddenly she found herself drawn into her life. Wow. And she saw about her loneliness, her isolation, but most important, her independence, and how she didn't want to go into hospital. She wasn't listening to the consultants who were standing at the end of the bed. She wasn't listening to the nurse or the home help who came to tell her, do this and do that. And she struggled right up to the end to be her independent self. And I think that's a message for our time when, you know, you go into hospital and they say, and how are you, love, or how are you, dear, and how are we today? You know, all of this. Now, Doris Lessing wrote, but it was under a pen name. But the second one was kind of turning that right around. And it was If the Old Could See. And here was Jane, who was an older woman, who was forced to accept her niece, Kate, a young woman who was coming to live with her. Yeah. And of course she came, she was a hippie and she was all dressed up and she had earrings coming out of every place. She had pink hair. She had all the usual and she was going out late at night meeting her friends. And then she found herself brought into that world. Yeah. And she gave me that. But it is wonderful.
Smart book.
And I think that and those two books, you know, when you have conferences now and everything is, you know, you're looking at the clock and you're looking at the screen and sometimes the question is more important than the answer. But I think that was
love that. Okay, that's beautifully described. And what's lovely about this podcast is that, generally speaking, people say to me, I take a list of all the books that you're talking about and I go into a lady said to me the other day, I went into the library and she said, the librarian said, please don't tell me that's a Tubridy list. And she said, it is a Tubridy list. She goes, there's nothing there for another year because they come in with their lists and they're booked out, which is a good sign. So there'll be a run on Doris Lessing and
I should say, I suppose we grew up at the library because Olivia Hughes started the library in Feathers. And I joined the library when I came to Dublin and I'm a great believer in libraries.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
I think they are wonderful.
And a great democratic service.
And we have a lovely one. I live in Rathmines now and they have a speakers club and they have all kinds of... I should be using it a bit more, but I'm a great believer in libraries.
You're amazing. Tell me when you fell in love. Oh my goodness.
Well, I suppose my poor husband Charlie died 3 years ago.
And I'm sorry about that.
We're the most unusual couple. He was a Dub and I was from the heart of the country.
I can't believe you
And
got
he
together.
always said... He was a taxi man. He was a really nice man. Now, we had nothing in common, but we had lots in common. But I remember...
What does that mean?
I remember when he used to go down to visit my mother, and my mother would be sitting in front of an open fire. Now, my mother said she would never go into a nursing home, but she had to end up in hospital at one stage. And my brother said, now, you're only going in for 3 days to allow me to fix the cooker. She went in, she wouldn't eat anything, she wouldn't speak to the neighbours, she went on hunger strike and that was it. So she was a fiercely independent woman. So when Charlie used to come down to Prairie and he'd be there telling her about his mother and what she cooked and she used knit and she used read and he'd be telling her and my mother then would be telling him about making homemade bread and country markets. And I was always afraid when I'd come back that I'd find the two of them in the open fire because they could spend hours chatting. Yeah. And he was really, and he used to do extras in Fair City. He had long white hair, longer than mine.
Yeah, sure, I met him.
Met him.
Tell me how you met him in the first instance. I mean, was Cupid there sitting in the corner of a pub or a coffee shop with the bow and arrow?
I suppose I was. I was.
What happened?
I mean, there am I talking now to somebody who has met somebody, and the two of you are beautifully in love, and that's marvellous. But you know how you have people, and they're madly in love, and they're this, and then it all falls apart.
Yeah.
So I suppose it was just a natural progression. But when I was night sister in Bagot Street, a woman who was dying told me my fortune. She called me one night, and I can still see the woman. And I was sitting beside the bed because we used to chat with the patients. And she said, I'm going to tell you now, your life is going to change dramatically. She said, there's a medical student who's going to ask you to go to the nurses' dance because we used to have those big fancy balls in the lovely Shelburne's, a great place. Yeah. And so she said, this student, he's a lot younger than you, he'd be embarrassed because he's a student, but go to the dance with him, nothing will become of it. Then she said, you will be asked by the hospital to do something completely different. And then you will give it all up. You'll meet a widower and he will have 4 children. And she gave me the initials. And then she said, you will give it all up and you will become very well known.
Oh gosh,
it's scary.
I got goosebumps.
Every single thing. There was
he was a widower?
Yeah.
He had 4...
The
initials?
And he had one child who died. So when I met him, I thought he just had 3 children. She gave me the initials. Now, it is scary.
That is so...
And it is scary.
Okay, let me ask you. Would you be sceptical about that sort of thing, or are you open to the universe talking to you like that?
Well, I am. I think there's a part of me, and I think deep down I'm a very creative person.
No question.
But I think my creativity is probably... I probably haven't used it to the best advantage, but maybe I have in our work. But how could you be sceptical when everything has happened?
What was it about Charlie that charmed you?
He was driving a taxi, and in those days we used national radio cabs.
I remember.
We used to ring up national radio cabs and say, and you'd ring to get someone to hospital or whatever. And I think I just got... He was coming. We were celebrating, I think, 10 years or something at work. And I rang up national radio cabs and I said, driver 65, he's a very nice man to people who come in here. And will you ask him to come down? And I suppose that's how...
You literally hailed a taxi and got a husband. I mean, that's a very Alice Leahy story.
But anyway, we had a simple life and we had a great life. And
what did you love doing most with him?
I think when I got married, people said to me, and Paddy Gallagher, who worked with me, who was a self-taught artist, who had been in prison for a long time, and Paddy said, "Oh, Alice, when you get married now, you'll give up the work and you'll change." And actually, it was the opposite, because I was very independent, he was very independent, and he supported me. He did all the cooking. That's why I have lost some weight and I look fitter, because since poor Charlie died, I'm not having a fry up on a Sunday morning, or I'm not having a lovely curry.
And he was doing all these things.
And he was. And he was, and we went to the theatre together, and and he had a great sense of community. When he was young, he was in the FCA, and that great sense of community. I often said to him, "Well, now, Charlie, if you're gone before me," he always said to me, "Your time is up, your time is up."
Okay.
And I often said to him, "Well, if you're gone before me, Charlie, how do you think I'll get on? Because I live in a local authority estate. I have wonderful neighbours, and the kids. So I would have known. And I'd say, look, would you ever get off the ball? You're destroying the flowers, kicking the football in. They now are grandparents, and they'd say, and when Charlie died, and they'd always say, "No, Alice, if you want anything, make sure you let me know. Don't be afraid to ask." I have the most wonderful neighbours.
How did Charlie die? Do you mind me asking you?
Well, he was as fit as a fiddle, and he suddenly got very ill 3 years ago, and died very quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I would wonder, about all the stuff that had gone on around COVID and all that.
You think something might have lingered?
Now. But he didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
But I will never forget we had a wonderful GP, Peter Sullivan. Peter had an old horse up the mountains, and Peter would send me a Christmas card with the old horse on it. Yeah. And Peter came round, and then the ambulance men came. And I will never forget, I always had huge admiration for the Dublin Fire Brigade ambulance man.
Yeah, they're great.
And there was
really
this big ambulance man. I was about up to his waist, and he put his arm around me. I see I couldn't go in the ambulance. Yeah. And he put his arms around me and he said, "Are you all right?" Yeah. But anyway, went to James's, and you see, you couldn't visit because of COVID. With all of that. But then I got a visit, and would you believe it? Davis Coakley, who was a geriatrician, my hero in medicine was Professor James McCormack. And Davis Coakley worked with him. He was a geriatrician. And wasn't Davis Coakley's son looking after Charlie?
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
And I just felt, I said to him, I brought him a copy of the book Wasting Time with People. It was a number of essays I put together with different people who wrote in them. And I gave him a copy of the book, but I just felt he was in good hands. And he was on a ventilator for about 3 weeks. But it restored my faith in medicine, because sometimes, when you give, I set up an intensive care unit, the first of its type in Ireland. President Childers opened it. And then when I told the consultant I was leaving, he said he'd make an appointment for me to see the psychiatrist, and he meant it. He meant it. But I knew I wasn't mad. No. But maybe some people think I am, but that's all right.
And tell me, how have you been since Charlie passed away?
People have been very good to me.
Yeah.
You see, I suppose I had come across death a lot. I looked after my grandfather, my great aunt when they were dying, and death is part of life. So I have I mean, of course I miss Charlie. I would feel very alone at times. But then I suppose I was always a bit of a loner.
That independence has probably helped your lifelong independence.
It has
helped with the mechanism of coping with your grief.
It has.
Yeah.
And I am hugely independent.
Yeah.
But I am quite happy to go in the evening, get a book out and get lost in it.
Would you go to the cinema on your own?
I would.
Would you eat in a restaurant on your own?
I would. I sometimes go down to the bank, that lovely, the palace, if they hear me talking about the bank. But anyway, I sometimes go down to the bank, and when you go in, they do lovely food there.
And you're happy
I said to one of the staff one day, I came across a poem. Can I read this?
Is this from the book that brought you joy?
My third book.
Let's do it. This is the book it's a selection of poetry called...
well, it's one of a selection of poems by that wonderful poet,
Padraig.
Padraig. And Padraig is an Augustinian.
A monk,
he's a wise and modest man. He's a wonderful man. He worked in Africa and he's up in John's Lane. But he's written 13 books and he has translated several books. And it's all about... It's a bit like Heaney and Patrick Kavanagh.
Oh, yeah.
Where they can write about the sometimes poetry can become very elitist.
And over there. Yeah, but this is accessible.
I don't waste my time on that.
What's this one called?
Well, this is called Café.
Oh, lovely.
And this is Padraig now, but this is me sitting in the bank. I am in a quiet corner of the cafe sipping tea. A girl with cascading curls passes with her tray. She nods and smiles. I wonder how I look to her. Old and harmless, someone's granddad, who see myself half my age, impacting still. Yeah. Isn't that
lovely? Yeah. Still half his age as far as he's concerned.
Yeah.
It's funny, Vogue Williams is another guest on the podcast in months and years gone by. And she, and weirdly my eldest daughter, have shared this thing where they cry nearly when they see somebody old on their own, struggling with the back. And they go, I just want to go over to them.
Isn't that lovely?
I wonder, is the old person saying, don't have sympathy or pity for me. I'm just trying to get you, fumble a bit in my bag.
I think it's a bit of both, because I have heard people say to me, well, somebody offered me a seat, and I said to them, I'm not elderly.
What are we to do with this?
No, but then if somebody who's generous, I always say, well, look at somebody, they're not looking at you, they just feel you could do with the seat. So I would always say, well, I would take the seat, but I would always say, well, thank you very much. Are you sure? So I think we need to encourage people. But I do think part of the problem is we have kind of got to the stage where we see old people as a nuisance, a statistic. They're meant to be in there. They're meant to be taking their calcium and their this, that. They are. Don't get me wrong.
No, but it drives me mad to hear this. Because these people, you're in your early
80s?
70s? No, you're in your 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, if only people...
But I think I'll keep going until I'm nearly 100. It's in the genes.
Well, you've told us about your relatives. And if people need to see this interview on YouTube as well as listen to it, because you look extraordinary. I mean, you wouldn't be... You could be comfortably in your late 60s, tops. You've a very regal feel to you. You're just clearly like fashion.
I can see Dove modelling. Can you?
I can see Dove modelling. You'd be perfect.
But you constantly hear, visit your elderly neighbour. Yeah. Do you know somebody knocked on my door and somebody had to check me to know could I read and write? Because, they were doing a survey going around and they thought because, you're in this kind of block
you're
or
in
whatever.
That bracket.
So, and it was Judi Dench, I think, said, I'm sick of people saying to me, have you retired yet? And,
we should explain to people that in the Alice Leahy, in your trust and in the organisation that you work at, you've given strength and succour, to use that old word, to people who have no home, have nowhere to go. And I came down once to see you there. I had a cup of tea with you because I wanted to see it. Yeah. And I saw the bags that people left full of hopefully useful things from a chemist. Yeah. So people, I was struck by that people would go into work and they'd stop off at the local chemist and buy 20 quid's worth of stuff, 50 quid's worth of stuff. They'd go to Penny's, Dunn's, and they'd buy socks and gloves, and if it's winter. And I just thought, wow, I didn't do that. I wish I'd done that. And that's what you've encouraged through that. And what I'm trying to ask is, first of all, thank you for doing that as a citizen and an admirer. But secondly, To what end do you do this? Like, why do you do this? Why do you feel you should have set this place up? Why do you feel it was up to you to help homeless people? And you see them, the people in there, and I always feel they just didn't get the numbers. They didn't get the cards. These poor people who just fell through the cracks. And tell us about your thoughts on that.
I suppose that's something I often ask myself.
Yeah.
And the only way I can come up with an answer is kind of the mystery of life. How did I end up here? How the people I met along the way. I've met billionaires, people with nothing, all kinds of wonderful people. And I think there's a mystery about life.
Yeah.
And I think we're not inclined to... And I think if you reflect on life... I mean, how did you end up here?
Yeah.
How did you... And the different things that happened to you along the way. And things happen for a reason.
I didn't realise... I didn't know what the burnt toast theory was until Wednesday of this week. When I woke up and coffee spilt here, the tube wasn't working there, all things were going pear-shaped. And what it is when you wake up some morning and the toast is burnt, rather than curse it and say, God damn it, accept that you're going to be delayed by 5 minutes.
Yeah, and there's a reason.
There's a reason you're going to miss that train. You're not going to bump into that person. You're going to go here. I was asked recently, and I did this TV show called The Assembly, and there's all these neurodiverse people.
I saw that. That's great.
And it was a great show. And one of them said, what would you change in your life over the last 40 years? And I said, I've made some mistakes and I've made some great decisions. And I said, but what I would change is, if I changed anything, I wouldn't be here today with my daughters thriving, a partner that I'm so lucky to be with, a job that I'm sitting here with you, Alice.
Well, I'd be the same.
So why would you change anything?
And there's nothing you'd change.
It's dangerous to change things, and it's dangerous to re-wish your life.
But isn't that where I think we need to encourage younger people and business people who are struggling? The conversation we're having here, I think that's one should be taking place in universities,
classrooms,
in churches,
early days,
everywhere.
It comes back to your thing, that in some ways, that if you had been a vet, you wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't be here. No.
Let's take the name of the autobiography. I know you've written obviously before, but that you have yet to write since that one. Alice Leahy.
Well, I did a memoir with Catherine Cleary, because if I started writing a book like this, I could be years doing it, because I go on and on.
No,
but Catherine Cleary,
she put manners on you. So if people want to read your story,
the stars are only warmth, and it was published by O'Brien Press.
Yeah. Alice, I've loved talking to you today, and I always love talking to you. And I should say to people, as the years have gone by recently, you always send me a gentle and thoughtful text to wish me well, and I can tell you something. It's a zephyr in my sails, and I'm always grateful to. And here I am, feeling very lucky in life, and looking at you so rested and happy. And even though Charlie has gone where he is, let me use the quote that I keep using now since I met Mary Heaney, Seamus's wife.
That's right, Mary.
And I met her at a train station the other day, and I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "I still miss him," she said. But I remember somebody told me, and there's a quote she quoted from somebody else, but look, here we are. She said, "He's not where he was, but he is where I am."
Well, I would say the same about Charlie.
There you are.
He's on my, and I felt even coming out the door as I was turning the key on the door, I said, "Charlie, look after the house. I'll be back, and I pity you're not with me."
Oh, Alice.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to overstate the case, but I'm very, very fond of you as a human. But I'll just say, Alice Leahy, what a pleasure to see you today. Thank you for your selection of books, and I'll see you hopefully in November. Mind yourself. This episode is brought to you by Ballymore, a company that creates places with soul, putting arts and culture at the heart of its work, alongside creating award-winning workspaces, homes and neighbourhoods across the UK, Ireland and wider Europe. To find out more about the places Ballymore is shaping, where people can live, work and play, visit ballymoregroup.com.